What I want to do now is a bit of a tangent, is just talk about why, because I think if you understand what's happened over the last 10 years that's led to things being so difficult, it can help you understand what you're fighting against. And I think there's that phrase, isn't it, better the devil you know? And it really is better to be really well armed and know why your local authority is saying no. It's not just that they don't want to support your child. There's 10 years of quite serious problems that have happened over the last 10 years that have led to the situation we're in today. So we're going to have a really quick trip down memory lane. When we finish this section, I'll tell you, and we're going to have a stop for a few minutes to have questions, which will just be about this initial first section about why we're in this mess. Any questions about this, the more sort of more specific things to do with appeals, we'll handle at the end. So these are all the things that have happened over the last 10 years. So these are all sorts of committees and Ofsted inspections and plans. And you'd like to think after all of this, and a lot of money's gone into this, that things would be better now for children with SEND. So in 2014, my daughter was about 15. I can't believe that. She's so big. In 2014, we had the SEND reforms, and the SEND reforms were there because things weren't working even then. From a purely subjective point of view, I would say really strongly that actually they really weren't that good even then. However, the idea then was to prioritise and involve children and parents, destigmatise diagnosis of SEND, improve outcomes, make plans more flexible, and consider the child's aspirations. And I don't think any of us would disagree with any of those, that they would be what we would want to see reformed. So that was in 2014. I don't know why it took them so long to realise that this wasn't working. This was the entire time my daughter was at secondary school. So in 2019, there was an education select committee inquiry, and I'm going to read this out because it's really powerful. They said, while the reforms of 2014 had been correct, they had not been well implemented due to poor administration, a disjointed approach, and a lack of resources and accountability across central government within the Department for Education and on the ground. They also said, and these are quotes, this is not my, if it's in quotes, I've taken this from the original reports, it's not my view. The system was compromising the rights of children with SEND to education, resulting in confusion and at times unlawful practice, bureaucratic nightmares, buck passing, lack of accountability, strained resources, and adversarial experiences, which ultimately dashed the hopes of many. Now that's pretty grim, and you'd think that after that they would have really changed things and put things right. So a year after that, we had the first Ofsted SEND inspections, where they were really thoroughly inspecting. This isn't per school, this is per local authority, and there are a couple of maps there which show the green areas were inspected and found to be doing okay in terms of the SEND provision. The red areas were given what they call written statements of action, which meant that they needed to improve. And the few grey areas had not been inspected at the time of this map. And you can see well over half the areas are red, and the SEND provision was still quite poor in 2020. I think it was over half that were found to have significant weaknesses in their SEND services. In 2022, we had a very big thing, which was called the Green Paper. And the Green Paper was again there to review what was happening in SEND for our children. And it said, children and young people with SEND feel unsupported. Their outcomes fall behind those of their peers. Too many parents are navigating an adversarial system and face difficulty and delay in accessing support for their child. So again, that's quite worrying. And then in the last really just over the last couple of years, there have been more Ofsted inspections. And you can see from here that I think it's roughly a third of areas experience positive experiences and outcomes for children and young people. 2/3 experience inconsistent experiences and outcomes for children and young people. So some will be good and some not so good. And at least a third have widespread and/or systemic failings leading to significant concerns. And again, the alarm bells ring. quite loudly. The reason that while all this has been going on, it's important to understand that, like as I say, local authorities aren't trying to upset us and help and not help us, but they are. This shows debt. So this is the accumulated debt over the last almost 10 years. And as you can see, local authorities have really serious debts. And the primary reason that they give for these debts is the demand. And I say demand in inverted commas. It's almost as if we shouldn't be demanding it, but the demand for support with SEND. The combined deficit a couple of years ago stood at £1.6 billion. And by January of this year, 6 local authorities had effectively declared bankruptcy. Of course, local authorities are having to deliver a lot more than just SEND, and this is the situation that they're in. So they are pretty broke. And when I say that, the reason is being given is the demand for SEND support, there was a little spell in 2023 where it was people were asking, well, why is there so much demand for SEND support? And actually, whose fault is this? Why has everything gone wrong? And I think this is the thing that's upset me the most, really. Whose fault is it? So Michael Gove, who was then the minister with responsibility for local governments, stated, local authorities need more resources, that's true, and parents and carers of children and young people with SEND need to make fewer demands. Now, I don't know how fewer demands I could have made for my child at that time. If you have a child with a visual impairment, and other additional needs, you're making the demands in accordance to what they need. I've never met a parent who's made unreasonable demands. I've never met a parent who's asked for more than their child needs. And I think that's fairly unfair. This was followed up by Simon Hoare MP, who said, we always just have to keep a weather eye on the sharp-elbowed middle classes who are very good at understanding the system and have friends and colleagues who are professionals and who can help advocate in particular cases. I personally find that so incredibly offensive, to suggest that it's the fault of a small group of people who are kind of bullying their way into the system and getting the help their children need. And the thought that actually it's only the middle class families who are actually bothering to stand up for their children as if nobody else is. It's certainly not my experience with the families I've worked with who come from every possible background that you can think of, and being whatever level of income or anything else you have, the passion and the concern for your child is the same. And so that's anyway, but it's our fault as parents, just so you know. But it's not, absolutely not. So they came up a couple of years ago with a way to solve this problem, and they came up with these 2 absolutely fantastic things called the safety valve and developing better value for SEND. And we're going to just look briefly through them. So we're going to look at developing better value for SEND. So this is a program with 55 local authorities. So that's about a third of the local authorities in the country have been signed up to. And the aim was to support local authorities to improve their SEND delivery whilst working towards financial sustainability. So what that means is we're going to support you, the government's going to support you to do better, but spend less. And you can see there's a very jolly little logo down the bottom left, where children and young people with special educational needs obviously are really happy about this because they're all smiling. So this scheme is actually run through a 2-year consultancy with a UK consultancy firm called Newton Europe. So they've had £20 million almost to spend on this. I feel sure they know what they're talking about because their 2023 profits were nearly £44 million. And I feel concerned that some of the money that our children need is going into a private company with shareholders. But if they were going to do a good job and that was going to be successful, then that might be worth it. We'll move on to what happens in a while. So this scheme identifies opportunities. And what are these opportunities in developing better value for SEND? Because there's still lots and lots of local authorities who are still doing this. More needs met without EHCPs. more mainstream rather than special school placements, more EHCPs being ceased, and more post-16 young people with SEND being taken off EHCPs altogether. So they're the opportunities. I'm sure a few of you are looking at that and not feeling very happy. And Matt Kerr, who's one of the Special Needs Jungle writers, commented, if these opportunities are to work without harm to children and young people with SEND, they require capacity and resources that have not yet been identified. So I think all of those things could happen if there was the right provision in schools to meet need without EHCPs, if mainstream schools were better equipped and teachers were better trained to work with children with special needs, if there were more post-16 opportunities without EHCPs. But what Matt is saying here is that those things could work, but so far the resources to make them work hadn't been put into place. And that's obviously really worrying. Possible outcomes from developing better value for SEND. There's an assumption that children with SEND will be better off in mainstream settings. And I'm a great advocate for mainstream education if it works. The pressure on schools, particularly mainstream, is huge at the moment. They're facing, schools are facing real problems with recruitment, with budgeting. There's a real crisis in getting good trained teaching assistants in. There's an increased difficulty in obtaining and maintaining EHCPs. And another possible outcome that they look for in developing better value is reducing EHC provision by 20%. So about a year ago, I saw an advert from one of my local authorities down here, which was advertising for someone to run this scheme in that local authority, and it actually said in the job description, desirable qualities, one of the things said should have experience of reducing EHCPs. So it's of concern. I'm going to skip past this really quickly. You'll have it in your notes. You can check whether you are in the first, second, or third tier. The tiers are exactly the same other than when they started. So you can check that for yourself of what tier you may be in for if you are in this at all. So we're going to move on now to the safety valve scheme. So safety valve was introduced for the local authorities who were in a worse financial state than the developing better value for SEND local authorities. And interesting, there's no kind of cheerful logo on this one with children smiling. I can't think why. So this scheme has been offered to, I think it's 30 something, it's about 39, I think, local authorities who were really seriously in debt. And effectively, every local authority who signs up gets extra funding to erase their debt. However, and this is really important in wiping out that debt, each local authority has to agree, and I put this in yellow, to reduce or eliminate their deficit within 4 to 5 years, with the goal being to achieve a 40% cut overall in SEND expenditure. And it goes on to say agreements will be closely monitored, and if conditions set out in the agreements are not met, this is the government, we will not hesitate to withhold payments. So what this means is that they will have their SEND debt pretty well written off. In return, they must make cuts of 40% over the next 4 to 5 years. That's a huge amount. And it's why I'm trying to say that your local authority isn't necessarily against you. They have tied themselves into these situations because they're desperately underfunded. And if they don't make these 40% cuts, they'll get the debt back. So it's good. I think it helps to understand where your local authority is. So what does it actually mean? Safety valve, what are we looking at? A reduction in EHCPs, describing a reduction in EHCPs as positive without any reference to the pupil's needs. Setting out a need to reduce inappropriate referrals in relation to parents seeking EHCP assessments. I'm not quite sure what an inappropriate referral is, but that's what they'd like to reduce. Targeting a 29% increase in the number of pupils with EHCPs who attend mainstream schools. Bizarrely, because it's been going on for a couple of years now, I think there's been no kind of assessment work done on whether or not this is working yet. So without a review, it's hard to say how well this is or isn't working, though there is now a proposal that they are going to start to review this work. The other super people of who it's really worth looking at their website are IPSIA, who are the independent providers of special educational advice. And they warn that, and this is again, I put this in yellow because it's so important, that the conditions attached to safety valve agreements appear to encourage local authorities to breach their statutory duties to children and young people with SEND. And that's really of concern, because if you don't have enough money to meet your legal duties, you're going to breach them. And at the end of the day, we're going to talk about this in a minute, that actually is not, it's not legally allowed. Again, you can skip through this really quickly if you want to see what areas are under safety valve. As far as I know, with the change of government in July, they're not putting anyone else on this, which is good, but they're also not taking the people who are on it off it. There is a campaign going on at the moment to try and get the ones who are on safety valve to come off safety valve, but at least they're not adding new people. So if you're not on this list, you're not going to go on it with any luck. And again, Devon and Bay and a couple of other areas, Dorset, that we cover are sadly on it. So we now move to this year. We've now got the SEND and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan. And I get to this stage and I'm almost bored of reading about these plans. And I'm sure you're probably pretty bored about hearing about them, because of course what happens now is you start to think, well, actually, it's just another plan. And for me, the phrase kind of same old comes up. So they're looking at developing national SEND standards, which is not necessarily a bad thing, along with local inclusions, partnerships and plans, because there is a huge postcode lottery. So that could be actually an improvement. They're looking at developing an individual tailored list of educational placements. So you'd be given a list to choose from where your child could go. You don't have to take any notice of that list at all. Not at all. It's just that's what they'd like to do. They want to increase the number of families who opt for mediation rather than appeal. Doesn't really affect us either way, because if we're not happy with the outcome of mediation, we would go on to appeal. And they also want to test out a new template for EHC plans, which I think is possibly a very good idea, in as much as, again, every local authority has a very different way of doing EHCP. Some do them online, some still do them on paper, it seems. But a template that everyone uses would certainly make our jobs easier, and it might make parents' jobs easier if they've been tested and they're good. However, and this is a really big thing, they don't have any plan to change the law on SEND support. And children with SEND still have the legal right to special educational provision to meet their individual needs. And they've had this right back over this last 10 years. That right hasn't changed, it's still there. Mediation is still not compulsory, even if you're in one of the areas which is trying out the SEND and Alternative Provision Plan. They want to encourage more mediation, but it's not compulsory. And as I said before, you can still request the school you prefer outside of that tailored list. So that's important to know. There is something called the SEND Change Programme, and these are the areas which are testing out this new plan. And again, you can have a quick skip through that and see whether or not your area is on that. So if you're in that area, they will be testing out this new SEND Alternative Provision Programme. And if you have any feedback that you want to send in to look about how that's going, we'd be quite interested to hear that. And I have to say, I added this slide in a couple of weeks ago. The National Audit Office, now audit is about, whether things are financially worthwhile. They came up with a report which said there'd been no consistent improvement in outcomes for children and young people since 2019. The system often falls short of statutory and quality expectations. Safety valve programs and DVB are not the solution. So they've already assessed some of the DVB, and it doesn't seem that they're really helping. And if unreformed, the SEND system is financially unsustainable, which again is I think we've all heard in the news plenty of times. I don't know if it's the system that needs reforming. I think it just needs an awful lot more funding. So I know all that probably seems a little bit bleak. And you're thinking, goodness me, is that really, what it's been like? But it is what it's been like. But I just want to say something to try and talk about moving forward and what you can do. And that is this. It is how it seems at the moment. It is really bleak. It feels really bleak. And there's a picture there of a cloud with lots of raindrops. But, and this is the most important thing, the law hasn't changed. The law about what your child isn't entitled to has not changed. All of these things have changed, but the law hasn't changed, and the law will always take precedence over all of the things we've just looked at. But there is a rainbow, and there is a sunshine at the end of the rainbow. And I think it's really important to remember that the law is still the law, and there are rights that your child has, and those rights are very strong. They are very, very, very strong. And please keep this in mind the whole time, that the law is on your side and it is a strong law. So what I'm going to do now, just really quickly, is stop for a few minutes. If you have any questions specifically about what I've talked about the last 10 years, this would be a good time to ask them. We're only going to have 5 minutes. And then we're going to move on to the details of how you would go about appealing. And when we'll have more questions about that at the end, if that's okay. I can't see I think I can actually put it up. I think I can see the chat.
I can't see anything that's been put in
No.
the chat, Laura,
So
since
if
you
anyone
started.
wants to ask a question about this, please feel free just quickly to unmute. And if not, we'll go on to the rest of the session. I know it's all a bit daunting, isn't it? But it's really good to understand what's happened and why things are like this.